I think we're officially set up. We're live, we're recording, and I'd like to welcome everybody out again to Desert Flying Club safety meeting for March, and excited to have everybody here tonight. We got a great group as always. It's nice to have these virtual events that we can have a lot of people, but hopefully soon we'll be able to get back in the clubhouse and have these live. So we're talking as a board of directors on the timing for that and when we could do that. So a couple of quick club announcements that are pretty exciting. Just kind of status on current aircraft. We have been working really hard on maintenance, getting aircraft back up and running. Most of the aircraft are back up and running. The one that's still down for maintenance right now, that's been out for a little bit, is the Baron, but the props arrived this morning, and so we expect to have that up and going and flying again in the next few days. So and maybe even tomorrow. So we're pretty excited about that. The other thing we're excited about is we have 4 new aircraft that we are working on putting on the line right now. 2 additional trainers, actually 3 additional trainers, and 1 good cross-country aircraft. So we've been really busy working on adding additional aircraft to the line, especially on the popular ones. So quite a few that were coming. And then we have a new simulator that should be coming here in the next few months. So as a club, we're continuing to expand and grow, and really excited about the offerings that we'll have here soon. So look for some announcements. The other thing that we're looking forward to here soon is get back into doing some flyouts. And so just be looking out in your emails for some announcements about some potential activities for the club as the state of Nevada is opening up some of the requirements and things that they want us to do. Allows us to have more operations and more things together. So also, it'll be exciting to get some vaccinations going. The state of Nevada opened up vaccinations starting the beginning of April for most the entire population. So all that is good news for us flying, and hopefully see you guys in person more than virtual here soon. So that is all I have for club announcements tonight. We're excited to have Alan Zwick from our safety team to present to us tonight a topic on whether or not to fly. And I'll turn it over to you, Alan. And make sure you unmute yourself.
There we go. All right.
There we go.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, well, I'd like to welcome everybody to our meeting tonight, and look forward to having a little discussion here about weather and aviation, which is always something that we're thinking about when we go out to fly. You'll give me my next slide there, Nathan. Yeah, the idea is we're going to look at managing the risks and making some good weather decisions. Just throw out some numbers to think about from the looking around in the studies I saw. It seems like about 20% of aircraft mishaps are related to weather. But where that kind of hits home with our group is, of those, about 90% of that 20% is general aviation flying. And then of that, about 70% is personal flying, and 10% of it is instructional, which covers a lot of what we do here at the club. And also, of the weather-related mishaps, about a quarter of those are fatal. So there's some reasons to manage the weather risk and to make some good decisions along with that. So tonight we're going to start out by looking at the hazards. Then we're going to look at what we have for limits, and then how can we get some good weather information. And then we'll try to apply some aeronautical decision making to our weather decisions. And that'll kind of tie us into what Fernando was talking about last month with the ADM. So next slide, please. So what are the hazards? Well, I threw winds up there on top because about 50% of all of our weather-related mishaps are related to winds. Also, here in the Las Vegas Valley, that's something that we deal with quite a bit, is gusty winds or wind shear. So we need to be aware of that. And then next in line is ceiling and visibility. And that's where about 20% of the mishaps happen. The concerning one there is VMC continued into IMC when you're not an instrument rated pilot. University of Illinois did a study many years ago where they took 20 VFR pilots and put them in a simulated situation of VMC into IMC. And on average, they lasted about 3 minutes. So it was 178 seconds. The quickest one to get disoriented was 20 seconds. A couple of them made it all the way up almost to 8 minutes. But as you can see, it's not a situation you really want to be getting yourself into, because the probability of surviving that's not very good, and you don't have a whole lot of time to get things taken care of before you're going to get disoriented and eventually lose control of the airplane. Then get down into these the turbulence, density, altitude, thunderstorms, and icing. They're each down a little below 10% as far as causes. For me, turbulence really is more of a comfort thing, is what I try to manage when I'm looking at my weather to go flying, especially if I'm taking passengers. So that's something to keep in mind there. Density altitude is what we're going to be dealing with here in another couple months. Las Vegas, we already start out pretty high, and then you add in the summer temperatures we get here and some of the destinations we can fly to around here, and that's really going to impact your aircraft performance. Thunderstorms are a big threat out there. They contain 2 or 3 or 4 of these other hazards are kind of all rolled into one when you have a thunderstorm. And then icing, we're kind of getting out of that season, but that's another thing to keep in mind in little airplanes. And also, it's something that not the airframe icing that we normally are thinking about, but if you fly in a humid environment, you can have some issues with carburetor icing, but that's also something that we don't deal with a lot being in a desert environment. But if you're other places in the country flying around, you need to keep that in mind as well. And another interesting fact when I was going through these hazards was one of the things that was discovered in most of these mishaps when they did a check to see if they'd received a weather brief, and in about 40% of the time, the crew had not received a weather brief prior to go flying. So that's probably the number one thing we can do to minimize some of the hazards of flying, is to just get a good thorough weather brief and make sure we thoroughly understand the situations that we're going to be flying into. Next slide, please. Well, so talked about the weather that's out there. What are some of the limits that we have established? Well, one of the first things we always think about is, what do the CFRs say about it? And, we've got the definition of, what is VFR? If you're an instrument rated pilot, then you've got the limits as to when you need to have an alternate. And we've got how much fuel we need to carry based on weather conditions. Also, aircraft equipment can also be driven by some of that. But most of the time, the way I think about it is that the CFRs, they're just kind of the baseline where I start, and then I build from there. Because many times we get to then the next tier, which is the aircraft POH. It may have some limits in there that are more restrictive than the CFRs, as to if the airplane's not certified for known ice. I'll have crosswind limits. Also, takeoff and landing performance is something that plays into that managing our weather risks, because we get into density, altitude, and tailwinds, and those kind of things can dramatically change our takeoff and landing role, as well as if there's terrain involved. Am I going to be able to clear it? What are the winds aloft if I am flying around the mountains, because that can get me into turbulence or downdrafts that may exceed the limits of my airplane. And then some of the other limits I threw out here, if you fly for a living, and if you're under Part 121 or 135, whatever company you work for, they're going to have op specs that they've negotiated with the FAA that may have weather limits embedded in there. Sometimes it's driven by the insurance that you've negotiated for your airplane if you're flying personally. Or in our case, there's a few things I was digging around with the club rules, and it's can't go above a 5,000 foot pressure altitude unless you've been signed off to do that. And then if you're a student here, there's some wind limits and weather limits as well there. So sometimes it's those that are going to be setting our limits. And then after we've kind of looked at those as the environment around us and that we're flying in, then we also have to look in the mirror and see, what are my personal limits? And I've got a couple of links there to websites, and this is from AOPA Safety Institute. There's some others that are out there too, where you can pull up, and they've got forms that are contracts that you can set down and fill out. So you'll give me my next slide. You can see this next slide has the an example of a personal minimums contract for a VFR pilot. You can kind of look through that, and so you kind of list how much you've been flying, how you feel about your currency. There's some stuff with the weather, the airport, you're looking at that. You're looking at the airplane that you're flying. And then there's some things that I will do. And I think these contracts are great to sit down sometime when you're no pressure and in a good frame of mind to kind of go through and really assess, what are my capabilities? What level of risk am I willing to assume with my flying? And fill this out, keep it in your logbook. And when it comes time to make that decision as to whether you're going to go out and fly on a given day, pull it out and look at it. And these two also have a line there where you can have a CFI or a witness sign it to kind of hold yourself even a little more accountable, so that you know that somebody else knows that this is kind of what you agreed to do with your flying. And if you'll bring up the next slide, it's a similar contract, but it's for an IFR pilot. So you can see where it's got a little more in the weather categories as to what you're going to consider when you make that go, no go decision, as far as how much risk am I going to assume. And along those lines, where it has the CFI witness, I think it's great to have a mentor with your flying. Kind of have somebody that can be your lifeline to call when you've got questions and you're trying to work through these decisions sometimes. Because even professionally, I have those kind of resources. When I'm flying commercially, I've got my first officer that I can include in my decision process there. Also, dispatcher I can call. So it's always good to kind of have somebody when you do get in a situation where you've got some questions to bounce them off of somebody else, get a second opinion before you necessarily sign up to something that you may wish later you thought twice about. Also, some considerations when you're thinking about your personal minimums are, is it a new airplane, something that you haven't flown before or not as familiar with? That is your airplane, did you just upgrade avionics in it? And how familiar are you with those and your ability to safely operate that equipment? Because once again, that's all additional task loading, as well as how am I feeling physically? Am I really on my A game today or not? But stuff that we need to be thinking about before we go out and strap on an airplane and do some flying. Okay, and if we could go on to the next slide there. Now we kind of talked about our limits that we'd be considering for flying. Well, where are we going to get our weather information? And that's something that has changed dramatically over the 35 years that I've been flying airplanes. When I started out, it was pretty much either stop by the weather shop or make a phone call, and that was about your only two options for pre-flight. Where now there's all kinds of information out there, whether it be weather apps that you can download on a smartphone or a tablet, or websites that you can log on the internet. Some ones that I like using, there's one, Airwix, it's AIRWX, and that's one that it'll pull up the METARs and TAFs for any airport that you type in the identifier for. There's also, for radar information, I really like MyRadar. Of course, there's a lot of those out there, and it's kind of whatever you're familiar with and like as far as features go. A couple of ones when I was researching this talk that I came across that I hadn't heard of before. One's called Weekend Flyer, and it's a pretty neat app where it has a sectional map downloaded, and you can zoom in on that, and then it has a little slider across the bottom, and you can go anywhere from current to 3 days out by just sliding the slider across the bottom. And as you slide it across, it shows you how the weather forecast is changing for the airports on the sectional chart. And they're color coded, and then have some other things, it's got little curly things for the winds and those kind of things to show you kind of how the weekend's shaping up if you're going to be going cross country or want to see how things look a couple days from now. I thought that was pretty neat. Another app that was interesting, it's called Cloud Topper, and you have to actually pay 99 cents for it, but it uses the sensors in your phone and the camera, and it gives you a horizon out there, and then you tilt your camera up and down, and it'll tell you how much you're going to have to climb to get over clouds that are out ahead of you. Need to be careful with that, given the performance of your airplane, and also if you're not an instrument rated pilot, how am I going to get through this weather once I get up over it? Another concern too is if you're using it and there's a lot of convective activity, those clouds may actually be climbing faster than your airplane will. So use that one with caution, but it is kind of fun to play with and just see kind of how far out the clouds are and how much higher than you are, or how much higher they are than you are. Another good way to get your pre-flight weather is with the electronic flight bag apps such as ForeFlight, Garmin Pilot. What is it? Stratus also has one out. There's FlyQ, and I'm sure there's many more, but those are kind of the most popular ones that I know of. And the advantage there is you plot out your route, and it'll then build a custom brief for you as far as you having to go out and get the data yourself. Also, don't want to forget some of the old standbys, and you can just pull up the airport directory and most of them have a phone number that you can call for the ASOS or AWOS, whatever they have on the field, or the ATIS. And that's a good way to get some current conditions and kind of see what's going on. And of course, there's always the old standby, the flight service station, 1-800 weather brief. And that has changed a lot over the last couple of years. They now have a interactive website. There seems to me the trend is they're moving more to internet based and less of the phone briefings, but still, you can still call them and get the old fashioned briefing over the phone as well. So we've got our pre-flight taken care of. We've got all the information we need for our flight. Well, once we get airborne, if it's going to be a flight out of the local area, we're probably going to need to update that weather along the way. And some good ways to do that is, of course, you've got the radio there in front of you. And most of the club airplanes have 2 radios, so you can use COM2 to listen to, I'll always pull up the ATIS or the ASOS of airports along the way to kind of see how the surface conditions are progressing as I go along and make sure that they're kind of falling in line with the forecast I was given. Also can contact flight service station on the radio and get an updated weather briefing from them. You can also talk to air traffic control. Just remember that's not their primary mission to provide you weather information, but many times they can give you updates as far as if they see any weather along your route or if things are changing from what was forecast. Something that's come online that's really handy now is the ADS-B in, and you can get some good weather information there. And way you can do that is there's a handful of airborne receivers that you can buy and bring along with you. I kind of did a little rooting around. It looks like they're anywhere from $300 to $750. I have one of the older Stratus receivers, and I pair that up with my 4Flight on my iPad and can get real-time weather information there as well as traffic, and that's a nice little bonus. Another provider that gives you a similar product would be to go with the Sirius XM weather, but now that requires a subscription, and depending on how many bells and whistles you want there, that's going to be anywhere from about $30 to close to $100, and then you'll also need a receiver for that. But one of the bonuses there is you can also get music to listen to along the way, because along with that subscription comes the XM radio stations, and that was what I used before I had ADS-B in. When I was using a Grumman Tiger to commute back and forth to work, I had a panel mount for my Garmin 396, and they had a little hockey puck that you could plug in the back of it. There was a receiver antenna that I just throw up on the glare shield, and I had an XM subscription, and you get NEXRAD weather and METARs and TAFs and weather information that way. Just have to remember the limitations, especially with the NEXRAD radar pictures that you're going to be getting with the ADS-B and the XM, where a lot of those radar shots are going to be 10, 15, maybe even up to 20 minutes old, which in a warm summer afternoon out here in the Southwest, 20 minutes is a lifetime for some thunderstorms. So it can go from nothing to a whole bunch of weather in a short period of time. So just realize the limits there and use it more strategically than you would tactically, like if your airplane had a real live onboard radar. And then last but not least, just look out the window and make sure that what you're seeing out there matches up with the briefing you got and the other weather sources that you're using. Is there a line of stuff building that may or may not have been forecast? Also, you can look down and see if a bunch of dirt's blowing on the surface. Maybe the surface winds have picked up more than were forecast. But don't forget to, while you're clearing, be also kind of processing what the weather is, and also do the same thing comes for when you get back in the traffic pattern. When you fly over the field at an uncontrolled airport, it's always good to pick out the windsock and figure out for sure what direction the wind's coming out of, and kind of how strong that wind's blowing as well. Another one of the things that you can see looking out the window is virga. If you see some clouds up ahead, you see the virga coming out of the bottom, there's probably a pretty good chance that even though it may look like the visibility is good and you can fly under that no problem, but there may be a few bumps associated with the temperature change and that moisture coming out of those clouds. So keep that in mind as well. All right, next slide, please. Well, so let's talk a little bit about how we can use our aeronautical decision-making models when it comes to weather. So we'll go over here. The 4 principles there behind ADM is, the first and foremost is we're not going to accept any unnecessary risk. And so then kind of the ways we're doing that is we're going to anticipate and manage those risks by planning. So we talked about doing our good pre-flight planning, get a good picture of what the weather looks like, not only currently, but for the duration of our flight, and possibly a little after our flight in case it runs longer than we anticipated. When I think about no unnecessary risk, when I flew in the Air Force, one of the statements that was always there was that there was no Air Force peacetime mission that required you to penetrate a thunderstorm. And I always thought that was kind of humorous, because I'm not so sure that I'd really even want to penetrate a thunderstorm in wartime either. Just, I guess, depended on the threats I was facing from the enemy on that given day. But definitely during peacetime, that's an unnecessary risk. One of the ways that we could kind of reduce the risk, especially associated with weather, is keep up our proficiency, and also consider, if you don't have an instrument rating, getting an instrument rating. And those are all ways that we can anticipate the risks out there with our better training and be prepared for them. And then that reduces the likelihood of unintended consequences coming from winds or ceiling of visibility. And then also we're only going to accept that risk when the benefits outweigh the costs. And think about, for me, I used to commute from up in the Sierra foothills north of Sacramento over to Oakland International. And I had some clear-cut things that I had thought about when there wasn't the pressure of me getting to work. One of those was icing was a threat that I faced up there, because I needed to get up to 6,000 feet for the MEA where I was flying in and out of. And so for me, if there were clouds above 3,000 feet and it was colder than 50 degrees there on the valley floor, I wasn't going to be flying my airplane, because I knew if I was in the clouds at that point with the standard lapse rate, it would be freezing. Now, was that a guarantee it was going to be there? No, but that's where, to me, I was accepting a risk that outweighed the benefit of me being able to fly to work as opposed to drive to work. Another way that I managed that risk too was, even though it was an hour and a half door-to-door driving, I always went to the airport 2.5 hours prior, because that was my minimum drive time. Because that way I knew if I went up and either didn't like the weather or something was wrong with the airplane, I always had a drive option. So that was how I kind of would manage my risk versus benefit there. And then the other one is to make our decisions at the appropriate level. And those were things we were talking about when it was, what are the limits per the CFRs? What are the limits per the POH? What are my company or club limits? And also that personal contract that I signed. What level of risk when there was no stress on me? I was feeling good, sitting there talking with my pilot friends about what I was willing to do or not do. What was that appropriate level of risk at that time? And keep those decisions at that level, not the, well, the weather's not really good, but I can probably make it. And it's not really supposed to go below my VFR minimums until 30 minutes after I land. So I think I can make it in. That's where it becomes a slippery slope. And it's very easy to talk ourselves into some decisions that we may regret later. Also, back up to how can we manage that risk by planning? With weather, many times it's to take off early in the morning, especially if it's a density altitude or thunderstorm issue. Another way that I manage risk as far as for comfort when it comes to flying over mountainous terrain in a little airplane is I look at, the winds aloft at the level of the terrain that I'm going to be flying over. And if the winds aloft are approaching 20 knots or over 20 knots, then odds are there's going to be some turbulence associated with that. And so I may think twice about loading up some of my friends that don't fly little airplanes a lot and taking them out and tossing them around in that. Also, ways that we can manage that risk by planning is, having an alternate plan, or if you have the ability to carry more fuel, and that may be where in your planning, if the weather isn't as good as you thought, or and you may think that you need some time to wait it out airborne or divert to an alternate or those kind of things, you may have to manage your payload so that you can fill the fuel tanks all the way up to the top as opposed to just to the tabs. Another kind of thing that I would do was flying in and out of South Lake Tahoe and Truckee airports when I lived up in Northern California was when I was just had a little Grumman Yankee that was pretty underpowered. If it was over 70 degrees, I wasn't going to take off from those airports. So I either needed to plan to go up there on a day when it wasn't going to get over 70, or to make sure that I was in and out of there before it warmed up to that, or that I could stay late enough that it was going to cool off. But those are some examples of where we can kind of set up our minimums before we get in that situation, and keep making those decisions so that we're accepting the appropriate level of risk for us personally and for the equipment and the environment that we're in. And then I put up the 3P model because I kind of like that one as something to use. You can use it throughout the whole planning and flying process, but for me, it's more once I kind of put my plan into action, is that becomes a loop that I'm just continually running through as the flight progresses. So it's, what do I perceive? Has anything changed with my environment, with my airplane, with me, with the fuel I have? And if I notice something different in that, then I've got to process that. Well, let's see. I'm flying along and they weren't forecasting thunderstorms till later. That they've cropped up earlier than I anticipated. So I need to now process that information. Is it something that, are they between me and my destination? Is it something that I can fly around because I've got the extra fuel, or is it affecting other things? I check my ground speed. Am I now picking up a headwind I hadn't planned? What else that's unforecast that's coming up? And it's not always that I do all three steps in order. it may be I perceive something, and then when I process it, well, then that brings up something else that I need to go back to. Okay, well, what other perceptions do I have out there? And then you eventually get down to where you're performing something, and it's either, okay, well, everything's good and we can press on, or I need to do something different. Do I need to climb and try to get out of this headwind that I'm in? Or is it that I'm going to land short of my destination and get more fuel, or wait out the weather? Or do I need to turn around and go back to where I departed from because things have deteriorated at that point? So that's how I apply that and manage the risks once I'm en route. It's not just a pre-flight thing. It's not just, okay, now that we've pushed the power up for takeoff, we're committed to this. No, risk management applies throughout the entire flight, and it's something that's always evolving as our environment and our mission progresses, and till we're safely on the ground and have the airplane tied down at our destination. So, well, I think that's pretty much it. So if you want to go to the next slide. You guys have any questions? We can open it up for that or discussion. But that's pretty much what I had to talk about tonight.
So if anybody has any questions or discussion, I've opened it up to, you can unmute yourself. Give a few minutes here. Thank you, Alan, for the great information.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There were some questions about electronic flight bags that were shared with the group here. ForeFlight seems to be, the most popular ones. Does anybody else use a different EFB to get weather information and use while flying that might be interesting to share with the group? Guys are all so quiet tonight.
Yeah, well, at work we use Jeppesen, and it's similar. It's kind of the same but different. Instead of the NOAA charts, it has JEP charts. But as far as the weather information it provides, is about the same. And that's been my experience with using different ones. Is most of them are pretty common, and kind of what they do. It's more of a personal preference as to what you prefer. And I've also found it kind of helps if I'm using what everybody else kind of in my community is using, because then if I have questions or want to get some local tech support, I can get some help.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest things too out there is they're constantly doing updates on these applications, and just becoming familiar with them. So you're not, messing around with your EFB or your GPS in your plane or whatever electronics. Sometimes we can get lost in those. And there's been accidents because people get lost in their electronics in the plane too.
Right. Well, and also become heavily reliant upon it. Don't plan on your autopilot being able to fly the approach all the way down to minimums, because you're the backup to that system. And it's the same with weather information too. I love to have all this stuff live and en route, but what if the battery dies on your Stratus receiver and you can't get updates? You need to have a good thorough brief before you leave, or you need to have some backup power supplies or those kind of things. So make sure that whatever you're using, you're familiar with it, and you also have a backup plan if there is some hiccup.
Great. Well, as always, so there's a question here from Lauren to address what constitutes a legal briefing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, well, yeah, it needs to be from a official source. So it needs to be, a government weather briefing just sitting there watching the morning news doesn't count. And two, it's kind of open in that you are supposed to become thoroughly familiar with everything that is involved in your flight. So if it's a local flight, obviously that's not going to need to be as in depth as if you're doing a cross country flight. But most of your apps are going to get you a legal briefing, as far as the EFB ones, if you do the briefing on that. But you need to review basically, the METAR, TAF, and NOTAMs would kind of be my short answer.
Isn't it a little easier to just say, well, if you did not have to provide a tail number, you did not get a legal briefing?
Well, I'm not sure in this day and age if you have to always provide a tail number with some of the online stuff that's out there. But yeah, I mean, definitely if you've provided your tail number to someone, then that is considered a legal brief.
So Brianna asked, what are some main things you see in for-flight weather or just in general briefings that would give you pause before making a GA flight?
Well, I would say anytime that you see TS in the vicinity of where you're going. So if they're talking about thunderstorms around there, also strong winds of any sort with a big gust would also immediately get my attention. Anytime they're reporting ceilings below 10,000 feet and visibility less than 6 miles, I probably need to be looking a little closer at things. I guess those would be some of the things. Also to either extremes in temperature, high or low.
All right. Well, what I'm going to do here for a second, we're going to stop the screen share and the live Facebook, just kind of end this portion of the program. I'd like to separate us out into breakout rooms again, maybe larger groups, and we could share an experience, maybe where we made a decision not to go on a flight because of weather, or maybe our personal minimums, or potentially when, weather changed into a condition that wasn't expected as you progressed in a flight. So I'm going to send us back to breakout rooms. So I'm going to stop the share here, stop the live Facebook stream, and send us out into breakout rooms. So if you have a mic and a camera, so opportunity to kind of share a little bit with each other. So here we go.
Are we here without Nathan?
I am here still.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's about it for tonight. Unless anybody has any other questions or things that came out of your discussion in your breakout rooms that you thought was interesting at all, you'd like to share?
Catherine had a question about taking some lessons before joining. I don't know. Catherine, here, you got opportunity.
I am only in the United States for a short period of time. I'll be leaving to return back to London in a month, and just wondering whether or not to, log some hours, whether that would be possible in a short period, or what is the club's rules around taking lessons in a
So-
short period of time.
Yeah, we don't, we're working on it. We actually just had a board meeting earlier this week about a transient or a short-term membership. It's a request that we get periodically, somebody that wants to come in and take some lessons for about a month. Right now, we're set up for kind of more longer term memberships, but we are working out a way for us to get you onboarded quickly and, do kind of a transient membership. So you can join, you can get some lessons in, but I don't, maybe one of the CFIs can talk a little bit about it. Lauren, maybe just discuss what could be done in a month if Catherine joins. Lauren, you're muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yeah. Hey, Catherine, I'll be happy to talk to you about that. I'm thinking it might be better to maybe talk about it privately or something, because I don't know that it applies to everyone. So if you could get in touch with Joanna, she can pass along your info to me, and then I can reach out to you.
Sure can do. Thank you both for that information. Really appreciate it.
Yep.
If you have, you can always email admin@desertflying.club or fill out the contact us form on the website to find out information about the club. So I think we're kind of through, the last couple of weeks, maybe the last month or so, we've had some weather complications, that we got windy and stormy, and it's kind of weird to see snow in March in Las Vegas. And but we're heading into a great season. I think April and May are generally two of the best flying months around Vegas before it gets hot. So we're trying to add some planes on. Definitely a lot of capacity right now. If you guys are looking for instruction or getting checked out in some of the club planes, and we're adding more on due to demand. So any other general questions about the club before we wrap it up?
When are we going back to in-person club meetings?
That's a good question. So we talked again a little bit about it as a board. I'm thinking, we haven't made a decision, but I'm thinking over the next maybe next 2 months we might be able to do that here soon. So they've released a lot of restrictions. We're still not going to be able to fit everybody. Like, we had about 50 people in this meeting tonight. Getting us all into the club room, I think, would break some of the codes that the governor still recommended, but I think we could do some hybrid meetings, and hopefully to have that maybe not in April, but definitely by May is our goal. So, any other questions?
Nathan, Tom Strong. Got
Tom?
a question about, you said the simulator, are you going to replace the simulator we currently have with another one? And
We
if
are
so,
working on it. Yeah, so
Okay.
our simulator, the license expires at the end of April on that simulator, and so we have a plan in place right now to replace that with a brand new Redbird simulator. So
Oh, good.
don't know the date that will be coming in, but it will be an AATD. So those that are looking for instrument rating, it's approved up to 20 hours towards your instrument rating, and all the fun features of be able to log instrument time in it to stay current. So really excited about that, and I just don't have an ETA on it yet, but
Okay.
we are working on that.
Thank you.
Well, great, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Just a couple of reminders. If you want your Wings credit, make sure that you use the same email address for this meeting as Wings. If you didn't, if your Wings email address is different than what you use to register for this meeting on Zoom, it's more difficult to get credit because we do pull the attendance report for this meeting and give that over to the FSDO. Or actually, our new rep is Fernando Molina, and he can get us get you credit. But make sure if you used a different email address, it's more difficult to link them up because it's based off of that. So, but this does count towards some Wings credit. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. We'll automatically pull the data down from those that are in attendance. But if you did have a different email address, please let us know on that. And if not, anything else, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes to answer any questions about the club. But other than that, have a great night, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.